A sim racing rig in a coffee table. Why not? It's actually kind of brilliant. It's well thought out and beautifully made. Arguably, it's nicer than any of the furniture I own. But I also know that most of you probably aren't in the market for something like this, so let's just embrace that and take a look at a pretty left field sim rig that ignores the rulebook and does so with some panache. My first thought, this is suspiciously elegant. And that rather exposes the point. Sim rigs are, for the most part, pretty utilitarian, or ugly if you will. The coffee racer rig, on the other hand, is designed to hide in plain sight and be set up in the moment when you need to race. This is for someone that wants to fit sim racing into their life rather than the other way around, if you can imagine such a situation. Quick disclaimer, the guys at Race Anywhere loaned me the coffee racer rig to get some feedback, and I thought it was interesting enough to make a video. After I completed the edit, they decided they were actually going to stock the product, so I should highlight that I do have an affiliate program with Race Anywhere. You can set it up just as quickly as a wheel stand, which I guess is the closest comparison I can make. But that comparison is pretty thin, to be honest, and where it differs is not just aesthetic, but in the engineering and specifically in its stability. This thing was absolutely fine with my CSLDD at 8 Nm, and any movement that was there was imperceptible while driving, though the camera does expose just a tiny bit of sympathetic motion during those peak torque moments. In fact, I've used a number of permanent sim rigs that really don't fare as well. That rigidity is in part thanks to the design, which makes use of plenty of nice thick steel sheet, multiple locking mechanisms, and a well thought out system of adjustments that doesn't solely rely on the tension of the locks themselves. And the rest of the stability comes from good old-fashioned physics. 40 kilos of mass keep this thing in place, and magnetically attached removable grips on the bottom do a great job of stopping it wandering across the carpet too. In furniture mode, you have the choice of walnut or oak tabletop elements, and the option for it to be set up either horizontally as a small coffee table, or as an end table stroke plant stand, or a Le Mans paraphernalia display. And the bits of tree are beautiful, but so is the finishing on the functional rig elements as well, particularly the complex shape of the wheel stand, which really isn't a trivial thing to achieve. So, driving then. Of course, sofa-based racing is a bit of a compromise if you're used to having a permanent setup, and I'll admit I did have some concern about the amount of clearance between the chassis and the back of my legs. Our sofa is low and squishy, much like myself, and I found that there was just enough clearance between the back of my knees and the outer casing to race comfortably, but only just. When I tested it out with our other sofa, which isn't getting put on camera anytime soon thanks to having a 2-year-old, there was much more room. And in either case, I quickly found a comfortable driving position and just sort of forgot the rig was there, which is exactly what you want. I was loaned the coffee racer rig by the guys at Race Anywhere to get some feedback, but I thought it was sort of different and interesting enough to make a video. And when it arrived, it had the T248 that you've seen in this video, but I couldn't help but try it out with a CSLD and my trusty old V3 pedals. The wheelbase was bolted neatly onto the removable top plate of the wheel deck, which was then placed back onto the rig with 4 tensioning screws that you can use to fine-tune the horizontal position of the wheel. I ran into a small issue with the V3s as there weren't any mounting holes that were aligned with the rear of the pedals, so I just used the front tool. Now, if this were my rig, I'd have just got out the drill and made a couple more holes, but I do have to give this back. In fact, as it happens, I should have mounted the pedals 1 row further back anyway, but as usual, I got distracted by cameras and lighting. The takeaway here is that the interaction between the pedals and the wheelbase is critical to being able to close the rig down. If they're mounted too far forwards or the pedals themselves are too tall, you end up limiting the size of wheelbase that you can fit inside. Now, having a removable rim does make things significantly easier, so a Thrustmaster or Fanatec choice may be better overall, but I noted no issues whatsoever with the supplied T248 or the G29 I briefly tested. As an aside, I did do some cable management, and I would definitely advise using some sort of cable shroud with any kind of folding rig. I didn't encounter any kinks or pinches in the wiring when I set this up and down about 500 times while shooting in the studio, but, better safe than sorry. Also, it does look better. While this is intended for those of us that race in a living room, I figured a desk-based setup like you see here is something that would appeal to those that don't have a dedicated space for their sim. And I found out while making the video that a less flashy version of the rig is in the works for that very purpose. It forgoes the beautiful wooden top in the process, but does add in quick lock mechanisms for the pedals that mirrors those used on the wheel deck, which really should speed up setup time a little further and add more stability in the pedal leg. I'll admit, I was genuinely impressed by how well this desk setup worked. When I got back into sim racing 5 or 6 years ago, I did something similar with the wheel stand, and it wasn't as stable as I'd have liked, and having to fold down the stand and put it away in a cupboard every night definitely added to the can I be bothered equation. With this setup, the setup and pack down times are comparable, but you can just fold in the rig and move it off to one side when you're done and your desk is usable again. Now, if you combine that with a height adjustable desk like I've used here, you've got something surprisingly practical, even with a wheeled office chair, which, let's be honest, isn't the best choice, but it's what I had to hand. With the V3 pedals only bolted at the front, I did detect a little bit of movement in the pedal deck, and even with the TLCM pedals that were supplied, it wasn't quite as rock solid as the wheel mount. My understanding is that a future version of the Coffee Racer Living will be getting the same quick lock mechanism as the Play version, the desk version, and that's going to echo what's in use on the wheel deck, which I think is a great move. If you're a die-hard sim racer, the Coffee Racer rig probably isn't for you, but for the right person, I think it offers an interesting alternative. My father-in-law, for example, expressed an interest in racing sims, but there is absolutely no way he'd have something like this in his house. If you've got a nicely furnished home, 80/20 monstrosities are probably out of the question. And if you're someone that sees racing sims as a fun way to spend a bit of time rather than an all-encompassing borderline addiction like some of us, I can see the appeal. So it's about priorities, and as I'm sure you've guessed by looking at the materials used and the quality of construction, this isn't for those that are motivated to buy solely on price. In fact, the €980 the living room version costs could buy quite a lot of aluminium extrusion for those that are sim first and life second. Now, I'm not in the target market, so it's impossible for me to make a judgment, but I do know that good furniture is expensive, and that's probably a more reasonable point of comparison than a wheel stand. When you take away the pretty frills of the living room model, you can have the Play version for half the price. Still not cheap, but more in line with the cost of other rigs, and if you have the space or sim-life balance issues that these rigs are attempting to solve, then that may seem very reasonable. And frankly, these can be considered an absolute bargain when compared to the pricing model used for some other aesthetic sim rigs on the market. So, to sum things up in a sentence, the Coffee Racer rig is pretty niche, but it's brilliantly conceived, beautifully executed, and it's great to see something enter the sim market that's entirely new and not just a minor revision of something we've seen before.